But even if it were true that other public figures were our best friends, our very best friends, that does not relieve us of our duty to speak out of principle and not to cover up evil or shy away from addressing it out of friendship. So no, Tucker Carlson, it is not an excuse to go silent on Candace's targeting of TPUSA. Or to mirror her bullshit lines of questioning because you love Candace personally. The same holds true of Megyn Kelly, a person I consider a friend, characterizing Candace as a young mother and thus shying away from condemning her actions or fibbing about them. That is a non-starter. Meghan Markle is a young mother. Ilhan Omar is a young mother. That doesn't matter. And when Megyn said this week, quote, "My goal and my job here is to try to understand, yes, where Candace is coming from on this," and says she sees no purpose in inserting herself, quote, into this on one side, that is a moral and logical absurdity. There is only one moral side here, Erica Kirk's side. You know, the side of the widow with 2 children, whose husband was shot live on camera in front of all of us. Friendship with the person accusing TPUSA of a cover-up of Charlie's murder is no excuse for cowardice.
Hello, welcome to a new edition of the Right Wing Populist Podcast. I am the Right Wing Populist. So today, this is a special edition of the Weekly Wrap. As you know, Saturdays we call the podcast the Weekly Wrap. And today I want to mostly focus on Ben Shapiro. As you just heard at the beginning of the podcast, Ben Shapiro basically crashed out at a Turning Point event this past week. He went after everyone. He went after Tucker. He went after Megyn Kelly. He went after Candace Owens. And, you know, look, it's fine to go after Candace Owens as far as I'm concerned. Some of the critiques he made of her I think is accurate. But going after Megyn, going after Tucker, big mistake, bro. Big mistake. And Megyn and Tucker both responded to Ben. I don't want to cover it all. But before we get into it, I want you to subscribe, whether it's on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever the hell you listen to this amazing audio experience. I would greatly appreciate it. So yes, as you just heard at the beginning of the podcast, Ben Shapiro was at a Turning Point event, and he cascaded Megyn Kelly. He cascaded Tucker Carlson. He went viciously after Candace Owens. And the reason why I'm covering this is because there's been a big rift, I should say, in the conservative movement pretty much ever since Charlie Kirk was shot. There was already tensions brewing before that, but with Charlie no longer being here, the tension has just seeped out. And the reason for that is, in a sense, Charlie Kirk really was the glue holding the right-wing media ecosystem together. He had credibility in both some of the more establishment, maybe neocon-leaning, Israel firsters part of the right-wing movement. But he also had credibility in the MAGA, the hardcore MAGA, America First, let's not get involved in the Middle East, let's not get involved in pointless wars wing of the conservative movement. Charlie sort of had credibility in both of these worlds. So he was sort of the glue that kept the sort of the coalition together when it comes to right-wing media, at the very least. But he's no longer here. And because of that, I think that's why we're seeing all this friction between the Ben Shapiro wing, let's call it, and the Tucker Carlson wing. And there's people in between these wings. You could say Megyn Kelly is frankly more in the middle. She's not like a hardcore, isolationist. She was not like original MAGA. But she's also not a neocon. She's not, she's pro-Israel, but she's willing to criticize Israel, which is just like a cardinal sin for the Israel firsters. So, and you can see that in the clip I played at the beginning. He called Megyn Kelly a friend, but then he, basically attacked her for refusing to criticize Candace Owens. Now, look, I have no problem with wanting to criticize Candace Owens. I think that lady is crazy. I never liked her, by the way. Look, I've dated a lot of women in my life, okay? Still in my 20s, but I've dated a lot of women. Not to brag, it's just statement of fact. And I can tell a crazy bitch from a mile away, folks. I can just tell. I can see it in their eyes. I can see it in the way they behave. I can see a crazy chick from a mile away. And with Candace, I could see it. Like, this bitch is fucking crazy. And I remember seeing all these, she was being promoted by like Fox News on all these conservative outlets saying, oh, look, we have a pretty black woman who's a conservative. Isn't this terrific, folks? And I'm just looking at her, listening to her talk, looking at her eyes, thinking to myself, this bitch is fucking crazy. Maybe we should jump shit before it fucking sings. This lady, she's gonna lose her fucking mind. I've seen this story before in relationships. This chick is crazy. And I was right. First off, she was a total defender, or she was associated with Kanye, or Ye, whatever the hell he calls himself these days. That was a disaster. I mean, Kanye is a fucking maniac, but he's a very talented artist. I'm not the biggest fan of his music, but he's obviously talented, Ye. But, that dude's fucking berserko. So, that was a mistake. And now, Candace, she's become the number one conspiracy theorist about Charlie Kirk's death. And this is the one true point, or accurate point, or fair point that Ben Shapiro made, was, Candace has been saying a lot of crap that isn't true about Charlie Kirk and his death. And she has implied that maybe Turning Point was involved, maybe even his wife was involved. She's implying that all these foreign governments was involved. Look, Charlie Kirk was a conservative talk show host at the end of the day. That's not the only thing he did. Obviously, he ran Turning Point. He helped get Trump elected by, in Arizona particularly, and I think Michigan, Turning Point had a big presence in get out the vote efforts. But at the end of the day, Charlie was a podcaster. He was a very talented podcaster who ran a conservative, movement. I mean, he ran a conservative outlet in an organization that helped promote right-wing ideas to young Americans on college campuses. That's what Charlie was. Why the hell would a foreign government want to kill him? Why would Israel want to kill him? Especially considering, for the most part, Charlie, if anything, leaned pro-Israel. So Ben's right to critique Candace. That's totally fair. I think, like I said, that bitch is crazy. Got no problem with Ben criticizing her. The problem is he's criticizing Megyn and Tucker, Megyn Kelly and Tucker Carlson. And the reason why Ben is criticizing them is because they had the audacity to critique Israel. That's the reality. And I'm going to play you more of what Ben had to say about Tucker Carlson for interviewing Nick Fuentes, the famous interview. And then I'm going to play you Megyn and Tucker's responses to Ben's attacks on them. They were at Turning Point, I think, the next day, and they responded to him. So a lot of drama. But let's play more of Ben attacking Tucker for interviewing Nick Fuentes.
For example, if you host a Hitler apologist, Nazi-loving, anti-American piece of refuse like Nick Fuentes, the Nick Fuentes who said that the Vice President of the United States is a, quote, fat gay race traitor married to a Jeet. The person who said that Charlie Kirk was a, quote, retarded idiot. The person who said, and pardon my language here, it's his quote, that he, quote, took Turning Point USA and fucked it, and that's why it's filled with groypers. If you have that person on your show and you proceed to glaze him, you ought to own it. There is a reason that Charlie Kirk despised Nick Fuentes, and indeed even chided Dinesh D'Souza for debating him. He knew that Nick Fuentes is an evil troll, and that building him up is an act of moral imbecility. And that is precisely what Tucker Carlson did. He built Nick Fuentes up. And he ought to take responsibility for that, just as he ought to take responsibility for glazing pornographer and alleged sex trafficker Andrew Tate, or for mainstreaming fake historian and pseudo-Nazi apologist Daryl Cooper as America's best and most honest popular historian. Hosts are indeed responsible for the guests they choose and the questions they ask those guests.
By the way, just as an aside, why does it sound so weird when Ben Shapiro uses the word glaze? Like, it just doesn't come off naturally. Like, bro doesn't know how to say glaze. Tucker glazed Nick Fuentes. He glazed him. He glazed him. Bro, why are you saying glaze like that? First off, he didn't even know what the word meant. Early on, this is like, I guess, a talking point he came up with. When Tucker first interviewed Nick Fuentes, he kept saying that Tucker glossed Fuentes at the beginning. He kept saying, Tucker Carlson, he glossed Nick Fuentes, folks. You must support Israel. He glossed Nick Fuentes. Oy vey. I can't do a Ben Shapiro impression. It's too painful. But he kept saying glossed, and then I think someone is like, hey, boss, it's actually supposed to say glazed, not glossed. Ben was like, oh, okay, I'm sorry. Facts don't care about your feelings. Facts don't care about your feelings. I'm sorry. Then he started saying glaze. But that just sounds so weird for him to say. I don't know. This is not important. I don't know why I'm emphasizing this so much, but bro doesn't know how to say glazed. He thought it was glossed. Now he says glazed. It doesn't sound right. Fucking Ben Shapiro. But anyway, so, okay. Let me just respond a little bit to what Ben had to say there, and then we're going to play Megyn Kelly's and Tucker Carlson's response to little Ben Shapiro. First off, again, Tucker did nothing wrong with his interview with Fuentes. He just let him talk. He actually pushed back on Fuentes. It wasn't like in a vicious way, but it was in a professional, polite, way of pushing back. Nothing wrong with what Tucker did. He made it clear that to Fuentes that bigotry of all forms is wrong, including anti-Semitism. It was actually quite good to see Fuentes actually acknowledge that fact. Why the hell am I supposed to be mad at Tucker for getting Fuentes to acknowledge that bigotry is bad and that anti-Semitism is bad? No, I don't think Fuentes really believes those things, but it's good that Tucker got him to acknowledge it, which he did. Listen to the interview, folks, if you haven't. Tucker did a very good job of letting him speak and then pushing back in an appropriate, polite manner. Yes, he didn't treat him the way Ted Cruz treated him, but you got to remember, folks, at least you want to remember, Ted Cruz was the one to really escalate that interview with Tucker because he started implying he was anti-Semitic. Fuentes didn't do that. Fuentes, probably strategically, made sure to keep the interview civil. He did not escalate any accusations against Tucker. So, criticizing Tucker for that is stupid. Look, I'm not a Fuentes fan. Many of the quotes Ben read about Fuentes, yeah, I agree, it's terrible. But, again, criticizing Tucker for having a cordial interview is stupid. But like I said, Megyn Kelly and Tucker Carlson, they were at Turning Point the next day, and they responded. And Tucker didn't respond, I think, as directly as Megyn did, but I'm going to play both of their responses so you can see what they had to say and think about Ben's little meltdown the other day.
To question your motives, actually, why can't you answer the question? Why can't you answer that question? Why do you have to imply that some college kid is like some kind of Hitlerite or something because he's asking about an event? Like, what? By the way, it is okay to ask questions. And I thought that was like the whole reason we were against the left. They're not going to force you to get up there and make ritual denunciations because this isn't my religion, it's politics. By the way, your politics do not trump my love for other people.
You mentioned him, and your name came up on this stage last night in regards to pretty much all of this. Would you like the opportunity to respond?
Well, I found it kind of funny that Ben thinks he has the power to decide who gets excommunicated from the conservative movement, which shows a willful blindness about his position in it. It reminded me a little of when the girl who was the head of our middle school chorus told me she was going to take all my friends away from me. Chorus? A head cheerleader maybe, but so I resent the whole thing. I object to the whole thing. Ben and I, he had the nerve to call me a friend right before he called me a despicable coward for not calling out the people he once called out. So he both wants to parent me and be my child. He wants to tell me what I have to do and who I have to say what to. And then when I don't, he and some of his friends want to act like utter victims because I won't do what they say. They need me. I have to be their daddy and step in to protect them. And I am not their daddy. And I resent that he thinks he's in a position to decide who must say what to whom and when. Thank you. So I don't think we are friends anymore. I've been a very good friend to Ben. Nobody knew who the heck Ben Shapiro was when I started putting him on my shows on the Fox News channel. And I helped make him a star. And I've been very, very good to Ben over the years, and he's been good to me too. He just recently came on my tour, as did you, and I gave him the most kind introduction I could possibly give him because I know that he's losing subscribers a lot. And so I tried to do something nice for him by giving him a long 10-minute intro and personally vouching for him. And we mixed it up on Israel out on stage. It wasn't Israel because we're on the same place on Israel. We mixed it up over whether Tucker Carlson should be excommunicated from the conservative movement, which I do not believe. And thank you.
So I like what Megan had to say, especially. Sorry, it's a little bit of a longer clip, but I think the context was important. First off, I like the fact that she said that maybe Ben's no longer her friend. I think that's appropriate. I mean, Ben just attacked her, basically. Even though he said, I consider her a friend, then he fucking attacks her for having the audacity to not want to critique Candace Owens. It's like, okay, she doesn't want to critique her friend. Like, calm down, Ben. Again, he's just so fixated on I must protect Israel, that he can't handle the fact when people like Megyn Kelly and Tucker Carlson don't do what he wants. And I like what Megan also said, like, who decided Ben Shapiro gets to dictate what's allowed in the conservative movement and what's not? Who does he think he is, William F. Buckley? That's basically what William F. Buckley did for like 30, 40 years, is he tried to push out the populist voices in the conservative movement from like 1950 all the way through the 1980s. That was what William F. Buckley did. He tried to push out the Pat Buchanans of the world, people like that. So the party would stay sort of a bourgeoisie, upper middle class, the party of the rich type of conservative movement. He loved people like George H.W. Bush. He loved the establishment. That's who William F. Buckley is, or was. And that's who Ben Shapiro is. Ben Shapiro wants the Republican Party to be the hawkish, Israel-loving, old-school country club party of the rich, old Republican Party. That's what Ben Shapiro wants. And frankly, a lot of this tension you're seeing, it's not even just about Israel, although Israel's obviously a big component of it, which is just the fact that such a small country has so much influence and it's so controversial in our discourse as Americans is so stupid. It's such a tiny, tiny fucking country that's not even that important. It has no major natural resources. The only reason why it's considered important is because of the religious stuff, and that's fine. I respect it, But Israel should not have this much sway in our domestic politics, but I don't want to get into that too much. But again, who decided Ben Shapiro gets to decide who gets to be part of the conservative movement, who has to be denounced, who has to be censored? It's fucking stupid. And again, this is really about, and Tucker I think mentioned this later in his speech at Turning Point, this is more or less about their upcoming Republican primary for president. For the first time in over 12 years, we're going to have someone at the top of the tippet representing the Republican Party that is not President Donald Trump. Okay. And the obvious successor is J.D. Vance, Vice President J.D. Vance, who I love. He's awesome. But he is a America First to his core. He's probably more populist than Trump is, if you want to know the truth. He probably believes in populism at an intellectual level that Trump just doesn't care about. And this is quite frightening to the Israel Firsters, to the establishment, to the old school Republican Party, to the extent there are still people that haven't switched to the Democrats that used to be part of like the Bush coalition. They don't like J.D. Vance. They don't want J.D. Vance to represent the Republican Party. They want to go back to the hawkish, Israel-loving, rich people-loving, supporting the one percenters, old school Republican Party. That's what they want. And they're using Tucker as sort of a way to attack J.D. Vance indirectly, partly because I believe Tucker has a son who works for J.D. Vance, and you've had people criticize J.D. for having that person on his staff. The whole thing's kind of sick if you think about it. And, this is important. It's going to be really important what happens in the Republican Party going forward. If it regresses back to the George W. Bush version of the Republican Party, the party is going to die within 10 years. I mean, that coalition is not sustainable. First off, many of those people who are part of that coalition are dead, so they're literally not coming back. And the ones that aren't dead, they switch to the Democratic Party, and they're not coming back. So, if you care about the Republican Party, just as an institution, you want J.D. Vance to be the Republican nominee. I mean, he's the only chance Republicans have of winning the White House, 3 years from now. Given the state of the economy, it's very fragile. Trump's trying to course correct, I think, a bit, but, we'll see what happens. So, like I said, a lot of this is about sort of what I call the silent primary. Meaning the primary's not happening, no one's announced they're running, we're still a long way away. But because the presidency is so important, you're already starting seeing people jockeying for position, who's going to represent what wing of the party, which coalition. And I think a lot of this is about the upcoming Republican primary. So, anyway, Ben Shapiro sucks. And also, you want to remember about Ben Shapiro, and maybe I'll play a clip if I have it, I'll have to check. But he was a huge never Trumper back in 2016. He was never Trump. He literally was never Trump. And you want to remember, folks, he wasn't just never Trump because he didn't agree with some of Trump's policies, like his anti-neocon foreign policy, which Ben disagreed with. It was because of character. One of the biggest arguments Ben Shapiro made about not voting for Trump in 2016 and allowing Hillary to win, obviously, I mean, that's the conclusion you have to come. If you tell conservatives not to vote for Trump, he was telling people that it was better for Hillary to win than Trump. That's the reality. I mean, he may not admit that, but that is the logical conclusion. I'm sorry. But his biggest argument, or at least one of his biggest arguments for not voting for Trump and telling his audience, which was smaller at the time, but still, he was growing in popularity in 2016. One of his biggest arguments for telling his listeners to not vote for Trump was because of Trump's character. He said, Trump, he's a terrible, terrible person. He cheats on his wives. You must support Israel. That was Ben Shapiro in 2016. He said, Trump's a terrible person because he's cheated on his wives. He's vulgar. He doesn't have morals. That was one of his biggest arguments for not voting for Trump. And it's like, okay, I could understand that. But Trump didn't become any less vulgar the last 8 years after that. And he voted for Trump in 2020 and he voted for Trump in 2024. So what was the shift? What it turns out, Ben didn't really care about vulgarity. He didn't really care about Trump's character. He didn't support Trump in 2016 because of Trump's stated policies, being an isolationist or at least being anti-war, trade, not being a free trader, actually at times supporting raising taxes on wealthy people. Trump actually did propose that at times. Now, Trump's presidencies, both his first term and now his second term, they've been much more closer to a traditional Republican than most people would like. He's still the most populist president we've had in decades, but he's governed, especially in the second term, unfortunately, much more closer to a traditional Republican. So that's why Ben's been more, that's why he was fine with endorsing him both in 2020 and 2024 and voting for him, because it really wasn't about his character. A lot of these people, they don't care about character. That's just a pretext to criticize politicians they don't like. But if they like the politician and they support the policy, they don't care about one's character. As long as Trump's going to support Israel, Ben doesn't care about Trump's character. And Trump was one of the most pro-Israel presidents we've ever had in his first term. He's continued to be one of the most pro-Israel presidents. So yeah, Ben doesn't care about Trump's character all of a sudden. I mean, that's, it's sort of harsh to put it that way, but that's the reality, folks. So, Ben Shapiro, and it's a shame. I used to love Ben Shapiro. I was a huge fan of his. And I regret it. But, at the same time, it's like I was 15, 16 when Ben was rising to prominence. It's like, what was I supposed to listen to Fox News? I mean, Tucker didn't even have a show, I think, until 2017 on Fox News. So if you're like a younger conservative, yeah, you're going to listen to Ben Shapiro. Like, of course. And, he influenced a lot of my viewpoints, which is a shame. But anyway, Ben Shapiro sucks, folks, okay? And he crashed at a turning point. It's kind of revealing. It's good to see in that sense to show what a fucking snake he is to attack people he called friends, people like Megyn Kelly. And look, again, his critiques of Candace Owens is fair. I got no problem with that. Candace Owens is a crazy bitch, and she has been saying crazy things. But yeah. Ben Shapiro's, he's just the worst, folks. He's the worst. And and let's be honest, and this, maybe I shouldn't say this, but I don't care. He cares more about Israel. He cares more about Israel than he does the United States. That's just the reality. And you can't be America first if you care more about Israel than the United States.